The night my father threw me out, it wasn't with shouting, it was with silence. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not welcome here anymore." No questions, no second chances, just a slammed door and 15 years of nothing. I remember standing on that porch with a duffel bag and a secret I hadn't even asked for, wondering what hurt worse, being disowned or realizing I never really belonged to begin with. I rebuilt my life from scratch, far away from them, far away from that version of me, and I told myself I'd never look back. But then, they came to my door, uninvited, unapologetic. And what they wanted, after all that silence, was something I never could have predicted. Hi, I'm the daughter they erased, the girl they pretended never existed. And this is what happened when the past I buried showed up at my front step. Wearing suits, holding hands, and pretending nothing ever broke. If you've ever been shut out by the very people who were supposed to protect you, I hope my story makes you feel seen. Stay with me. You're not alone. I remember how the night air stung against my skin, how each step felt like dragging glass across my soul. My heels had broken long before I reached the front porch, but I held on to what was left of them, just like I was holding on to the last strands of hope. The hem of my dress was torn, my shoulder burned where his grip had left bruises, and my throat was raw from screaming into silence. I was 21, a recent law graduate, and the only thing I needed in that moment was to be someone's daughter again. I knocked once, soft, hesitant, then again, harder. The porch light flicked on, the door creaked open, and there stood my father, Gregory Moore, former district attorney, soon-to-be candidate for governor of Colorado. He didn't say a word at first. His eyes scanned me like a problem to be solved, not a daughter to be saved. "You picked a hell of a time," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "The press has been circling since the endorsement leak." Behind him, my mother, Elaine, stood frozen at the base of the staircase. She wore her silk robe like armor, but her eyes refused to meet mine. My brother, Michael, appeared at the top of the stairs, shirtless, holding his phone. When our eyes met, his expression crumbled. He came down slowly, handed me a clean towel. His hands shook. "I need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. "Something happened at the fundraiser tonight." Gregory crossed his arms. "Then it can wait. You're bleeding. Did someone attack you?" "Yes," I whispered. "It was Cole Ramsey." Silence fell like a dropped chandelier. Gregory's face twisted, not with concern, but calculation. "Cole? You mean Senator Ramsey?" He looked past me for cameras. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" I was in the guest wing. He followed me, locked the door. He didn't stop. Gregory took a step back. "You know who that man is to me. Do you understand what you're accusing him of?" I flinched. "I thought you'd believe me. You always said you'd protect me from men like—" "Don't you dare," he snapped. "Don't you dare twist my words and use them against me in the middle of a campaign season." I felt the ground tilt. "I'm your daughter," I pleaded. "This isn't about politics. This is about what he did." He looked past me again. "So what, Callista? You want me to throw away 30 years of my career? Over a late-night accusation with no proof?" "It's not just an accusation. It's the truth." Gregory exhaled through his nose, hard. Then he disappeared down the hallway and returned with an envelope. "Inside is some money. There's a place. St. Miriam's. They help women in trouble." I stared at the envelope like it was poison. "You're not staying here. And this never happened. You'll thank me one day when this blows over and your name isn't dragged through the press." I heard the front door creak wider behind me. "If you stay silent, you still have a future. But if you speak, you'll destroy everything, including yourself." The look in his eyes wasn't cruelty. It was conviction. And that's what made it worse. He turned to leave. My mother finally looked at me, lips parted but said nothing. Michael stood at the door, fists clenched. He didn't move. So I walked. I walked until my feet bled and my pride cracked open. I collapsed into the restroom of a gas station 2 miles away, locked the door, and vomited into the sink. Not from the trauma, but because deep down, I already knew. I was pregnant. And I was utterly, irrevocably alone. The city lights of Denver faded behind me through the smeared window of a midnight bus. I sat pressed against the cold glass, a backpack on my lap and my other hand resting lightly over my stomach. It was still too soon to feel anything. No flutter, no movement, but I already knew life had changed inside me. Denver hadn't just thrown me out, it had spat me onto the pavement and told me never to come back. I didn't have a plan. I had a pregnancy test from a gas station bathroom, a battered wallet with $340, and an envelope of hush money from a father who valued headlines more than his daughter's screams. But what I did have, what no one could take, was the decision that this child, this life growing inside me, would not inherit my silence. New Mexico didn't welcome me with open arms. It was dry, cracked, sun-bleached, and unapologetic. But it was far, far from Gregory Moore, from Cole Ramsey, from the weight of that door slamming shut in my face. It was also where I met Rena. We were both at the Women's Outreach office, eyeing the same bulletin board for a room for rent ad that had just gone up. "I don't snore, I don't steal, and I won't put up with your drama," she said flatly when I asked if she'd consider splitting the place. I must have looked pathetic enough for her to agree. Rena was in her late 30s then, sharp tongue, sharper eyes, a survivor of her own hell. She'd left a husband who thought fists were punctuation. We never swapped full stories, just fragments over laundry and secondhand coffee. She had 2 jobs and a steady silence. But she became my rock. She was the one who rubbed my back through morning sickness, who yelled at landlords when pipes burst, who left sticky notes that said "eat" when I skipped meals. I went into labor on a Tuesday in May. Rena was stuck on a double shift, so it was a young nurse named Carla who held my hand as I screamed into a hospital pillow. No family, no flowers, just one tiny crying miracle placed on my chest after 13 hours of pain. I named her May, not just for the month, but for what it symbolized. Rebirth, defiance, a second chance at everything I'd been denied. I never went back to law. The idea of defending a system that let people like Ramsey win made me nauseous. Instead, I enrolled in a night program for psychology. During the day, I cleaned offices. On weekends, I worked the register at a gas station. May slept in thrift store cribs beside me, and I studied flashcards while she napped. Years blurred together in exhaustion and survival, but the fire in me never dimmed. I wanted to help people who, like me, had no one to call at 2 a.m. That's how the shelter within began. A borrowed Sunday school room behind an old church. I printed flyers, took calls. I listened. I held hands. I cried with strangers, PTSD survivors, veterans, women from shelters, kids kicked out for being gay, people who just needed someone to say, "You matter." That little room became a lifeline. Then the heater broke, then the roof leaked, then the rent went up. I was close to shutting it down more times than I care to count. But then, one day, a check appeared in the mailbox. No name, no message, just a donation that covered the bills that month, and the next month, and the one after that. Whoever they were, they kept us afloat. I sometimes wondered if it was some past client or an angel with a checkbook, but I never questioned the miracle, because that's the thing about rebuilding your life. You never do it alone, even when it feels like you are. And so, May grew, the center grew, and I grew. Not in spite of what I'd lost, but because I refused to let it define me. Denver may have closed its doors, but in this sun-worn corner of New Mexico, I found something better. I found home. Our days had settled into a rhythm that felt like healing. I taught group therapy 3 afternoons a week, focusing on survivors of trauma. May, now 14, spent her evenings curled up in the farthest corner of our apartment with charcoal-stained fingers and music drifting from her headphones. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above an old bakery, the walls covered with her sketches. Faces mid-scream, trees split down the middle, and doorways that never quite led anywhere. The place smelled like paint thinner and cinnamon rolls. It was home. May didn't talk much about her father. I had never told her who he was, only that he wasn't part of our story. But sometimes, in her drawings, I saw fragments of the things we never said. That semester, her art teacher encouraged her to submit something for the statewide youth art competition. She hesitated at first. May hated attention, but after some nudging, she chose a piece she'd been sketching in secret. She called it "The Door Locked from the Inside." It was a tall, cracked wooden door. From the bottom, golden light poured out like it was leaking hope. In the corner, barely visible, was the silhouette of a child curled into herself, knees to chest, watching the door. The colors were muted, almost painful. When I asked her what it meant, she said, "It's the door I used to wait behind." I kept hoping someone would knock, but they never did. I swallowed hard. That wasn't my story. That was hers. 2 weeks later, we were called to attend the awards ceremony at the state capitol. May had won first place. Her painting was going to be printed in the Sunday arts section of 4 major newspapers and featured on the local evening news. I stood beside her in a simple navy dress while she gave her shy acceptance speech. She didn't smile for the cameras. She never did. I should have been proud. And I was. But a knot formed in my chest when I saw the photo go viral. A quiet, contemplative girl with soft brown eyes and sharp cheekbones standing beside a painting that screamed through silence. It wasn't the painting that drew attention. It was her face. 3 days after the feature ran, my phone buzzed with a notification from a political gossip blog. "Do these eyes look familiar?" The headline floated above a grainy zoom-in of May's face, cropped beside an older campaign photo of Gregory Moore. The resemblance wasn't damning on its own, but in the hands of a hungry press, it was dynamite. Gregory Moore was running for governor of Colorado. His entire platform was built on family values and transparency. He had a wife who wore pearls and smiled through debates, and a son who gave speeches about the honor of the Moore name. A long-lost daughter from a scandalous past? That didn't fit the narrative. Then came the anonymous message. "They're about to find you." No sender. No timestamp. Just those 6 words glowing on my cracked phone screen at 2:17 a.m. I didn't panic. Not outwardly. I had been waiting for this moment since the night I left Denver with nothing but a secret and a seed of defiance in my belly. I packed a small bag for May and texted Rena, who by now lived 2 towns over with her partner and their twins. "Take her to the lake house for a couple days," I asked. No questions. By morning, they were gone. I stayed behind and started scanning the internet. Most articles were tame. Think pieces about absentee parents, anonymous childhoods, stories of reconciliation. But one stood out. Buried deep in the lifestyle section of a local magazine was an essay titled "The Forgotten Children of Politics." It listed stories from across the country, whispers of abandoned kids, silent paternity settlements, rumors denied but never disproven. One line chilled me. "In some cases, the past doesn't knock. It paints its own door." I stared at that sentence for a long time. It wasn't a coincidence. Someone was sending a message, and they weren't being subtle anymore. That night, I sat in May's empty room, surrounded by the smell of her sketchbooks and the quiet hum of the streetlights outside. I realized something I hadn't let myself admit in years. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a target again. For 15 years, I had built a life behind thick emotional walls. But the portrait spoke louder than I ever did. And now, the world was listening. It was no longer a question of if they'd find us. It was just a matter of when. It was a Monday afternoon, the kind that slips by quietly unless you're paying attention. I was halfway through a trauma recovery group session, 3 women and 1 Vietnam vet, when my phone vibrated against the corner of my clipboard. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I glanced down when the 4th came through. They're digging into your father's campaign, and into you. It was from Rachel, a paralegal I hadn't heard from in over a decade. She had worked under my father's campaign committee once, back when I was just a face he kept off the Christmas cards. I stepped out of the room, heart ticking loud in my ears. Another message followed. Ethics reporter from Channel 12. He's asking about a missing daughter. The air turned thick. So it had begun. I didn't panic. Not yet. I finished the session, walked the group out with a steady voice, even managed to refill the coffee pot. But my fingers trembled when I reached for the handle to our apartment door upstairs. Something told me I wouldn't have peace much longer. By the time I stepped inside, I knew. I just didn't expect it so soon. 3 silhouettes stood in my living room. My father, in his campaign season gray suit, like he'd never taken it off. My mother, wrapped in a tan cashmere coat she probably hadn't paid for herself in 20 years. And Michael, older, softer around the edges, but still wearing the same weary eyes I remembered from the top of that staircase all those years ago. They didn't look at the art on the walls, didn't acknowledge the life I'd built here. My father got to the point. We need to talk, for the good of everyone. I didn't move. Did you tell May you were coming? He glanced at Michael. Michael didn't meet his eyes. Of course not, I said. Because this isn't about May. This is about optics. My mother stepped forward, her voice a strained whisper. Things are escalating. There are questions. The press has been sniffing around. They're starting to suspect. Gregory interrupted. We need you to make a statement. Say the rumors aren't true. Say you're not related. That you don't know us. I laughed once, sharp and hollow. You want me to lie for you again? We're prepared to compensate you, he continued as if I hadn't spoken. A trust fund for May, private school, medical coverage. You'll be set. All we're asking for is one line. Deny it. Just one sentence. And when that doesn't work, I asked, what next? A second press conference? Another envelope and a one-way bus ticket? Michael tried to step in. Cal, it doesn't have to get messy. You don't owe anyone a rehash of what happened. You can move on without dragging it all back. I looked at him. Funny, considering I've spent 15 years carrying what you all buried. They didn't understand. They never would. But I had expected that. What they didn't expect, what none of them were prepared for, was how I responded. I reached under the end table and pulled out my phone, hit a button, and let the red recording light blink in silence between us. You came here thinking you could scare me or buy me off, but I know how this works now. You don't get to rewrite my story. My father narrowed his eyes. Recording us without consent? You're in my home, I said calmly. Colorado is a one-party consent state, and I consent. For the first time, something flickered in his gaze. Not fear, but calculation. My mother said nothing. Her silence had always been louder than her words. Gregory turned, buttoning his suit jacket like he was zipping up a mask. You've made your choice. I made it a long time ago. You're just finally noticing. He walked to the door. Just before leaving, he paused and said, almost softly, "You've chosen war. Don't blame me when it gets ugly." The door closed behind him with a soft click, but it sounded like a gavel. I exhaled slowly, pulse still pounding, but my hand steady now. I had always thought the past would return as a whisper. Instead, it came suited, rehearsed, and asking for silence. But I wasn't that girl behind the locked door anymore. I knew how to speak now. And more importantly, I knew who was listening. 2 days after my father walked out of my apartment, I stood outside a quiet adobe gallery tucked between a pottery studio and a vegan cafe in Santa Fe. The sign read, "Ramsey and Root." The window displayed a portrait of a woman submerged in water, her face half lit, half lost. It was unmistakably Veronica's work. I hadn't seen her in 15 years. The receptionist looked at me like she wasn't sure whether to let me in or call security. But Veronica stepped out from behind a curtain, still elegant, still severe. Her hair was silver now, pulled back in a perfect chignon. She didn't smile, but she didn't turn me away either. She simply said, "Callista," like I'd never left, and held the door open to her private office. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. She poured tea, motioned for me to sit, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Two women scarred by the same man in different decades. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said. "I wasn't sure you'd ask," she replied, "but I've been waiting." It was Veronica who broke the silence first. "You've built something," she said. "The shelter within. It's real." I hesitated, then asked what had burned in my mind for years. "Was it you? The monthly donations?" She nodded. I knew what it was like to leave with nothing, but I had money. So I did what the system never could. I made sure you survived. My eyes welled, but I didn't let them fall. She wasn't offering pity. This was respect. This was recognition. The kind I never got from the people who claimed to love me. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not come forward earlier?" "Because I was scared too," she said simply. "And because it wouldn't have helped you then. But now it might." She slid a folder across the table. Every donation, every record, in my name, transparent, legal, and mine to share. I stared at the folder. "You want to go public?" Veronica didn't flinch. Not to name names, not to point fingers, but to say enough. To say it happened, and that it keeps happening, and that silence, especially the kind dressed in pearls and campaign speeches, kills more than it protects. We didn't wait. Within 48 hours, Veronica arranged a press briefing. No national circus, no televised drama. Just a handful of independent journalists with enough backbone not to be bought. The gallery's back room was cleared out and lined with folding chairs. She stood at the front, flanked by canvases that screamed louder than any headline. When the cameras clicked on, she looked into the lenses like they were eyes she refused to blink away from. "I'm not here to name anyone," she began, "but I am here to name the truth. There are women in this country who have been silenced, not just by their abusers, but by their families, their courts, their churches, and their fear. They carry the shame of others like it belongs to them, and they are not alone." The room went still. She continued, "I helped one woman. She's not the only one I know. She's just the one brave enough to exist in the open. Her silence was never consent. And neither was mine." That clip went viral in less than 6 hours, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. The internet exploded. Twitter threads dissected every phrase. Comment sections flooded with variations of, "Is she talking about Gregory Moore? Who is the woman she helped? Did he cover up something during his Senate term?" By morning, Gregory had released a statement announcing his withdrawal from the governor's race. "Personal reasons," The press release said, "Nothing more. No admission. No denial." But the damage was done. People didn't need a confession. They had heard enough. And me? I never said a word publicly. Never gave an interview, never tweeted, never pointed a finger. But the city, hell, the country, was buzzing with the story they had once buried. A story that had lived behind locked doors, in the mouths of daughters and wives and women who were told to shut up or disappear. I never needed to scream. I just needed to survive long enough to be heard. The gallery was a converted firehouse with exposed brick walls and too many spotlights. May had insisted on hanging the pieces herself, 23 canvases, arranged like pages in a diary. The theme of the exhibition was "Doors No One Knocked On." She said it with a half smile, as if it were a joke only she understood. Some doors were painted shut. Some were cracked open with nothing behind them but darkness. Some were missing entirely. There was one that looked so real, people reached out and touched it. An old wooden door with chipped blue paint and no handle. And then there was the painting that stopped everyone. It was smaller than the others. Simple. A man in a charcoal suit stood before a door, hands in his pockets. He wasn't knocking. He was just looking, like he didn't know whether he was too early or far too late. His face was turned away, but there was no mistaking the posture, the jaw, the weight of unspoken regret. "That's him," someone whispered. "Isn't it?" I stood behind May as she politely answered questions from a local art blogger. Her voice was calm, composed, far too calm for a 16-year-old debuting work that cracked open family silence like a glass jar. Then I saw him, Gregory. He entered the gallery like a man arriving late to a funeral. Elaine was at his side, her hands clenched tightly around her purse. Michael trailed behind, eyes scanning the room as if searching for exits. I hadn't seen them since the day they tried to buy my silence. Now here they were, uninvited, unannounced, and unsure of what they were walking into. He stopped in front of the painting. "That's me, isn't it?" he asked, his voice low, "just for me." I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't look away. "No," I said. "That's the moment I stopped being your daughter." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. A click echoed in the silence. Someone had captured the moment on camera. By the next morning, that photo was everywhere. A father facing a portrait of absence, a daughter standing just far enough away. The caption that went viral read, "When silence speaks louder than confrontation." People dissected the image like it was a religious painting. They called it brave, heartbreaking, political, personal. But for me, it was just Tuesday. Later that night, backstage in the storage room, Michael found me. He looked tired. Not older, just worn down from carrying a legacy that was finally cracking. "They won't stop," he said quietly. "Neither will I replied. He sighed. "I tried, Callista. I swear to God, I tried to make them see." "I know," I said, "but you still let them do it." He didn't argue, just nodded and left. A week passed. I was cooking dinner when I heard the knock on the door. The irony didn't escape me. For years, they never knocked. And now when the world was watching, they sent a court officer instead. I opened the door and the man handed me an envelope without looking me in the eyes. Inside was a summons. Gregory Moore was suing for emergency custodial review on the grounds of emotional manipulation and exposure of a minor to retaliatory public scrutiny. They were coming for May, not out of love, not out of guilt, but because they had nothing left to control, and May, bright and bold and undeniably Moore, was the last symbol they could try to own. But they had forgotten one thing. She wasn't just their legacy, she was mine. The first thing I noticed was the silence in the courtroom. Not the kind that comes with order, but the kind that follows betrayal. Cold, hollow. My name echoed off the walls, formal and distant. Callista Moore, defendant. Not mother, not survivor. Just a name they were trying to strip down to nothing. The petition was thick. Gregory had filed for emergency custody, claiming I was mentally unfit to raise May. He called me unstable, cited my history of homelessness, my PTSD diagnosis from 15 years ago. Attached was a heavily edited clip from a speech I'd given on trauma recovery, where my voice cracked mid-sentence. Out of context, I sounded unhinged. Out of context, I looked exactly like what they wanted the world to see, a danger to my daughter. I held the summons in my lap as if it might burn through the fabric of my dress. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor in the dark, my back against the kitchen cabinet, the paper still in my hand. May slept down the hall, unaware. And all I could think was, I was about to lose her. Not to a better parent. Not even to someone who loved her. But to power. To pride. If they can take her, I whispered to Rena the next morning, then none of it mattered. The years. The work. The nights she had nightmares and I sat up holding her till dawn. What does it count for if a court can just erase it? Rena didn't argue. She simply placed a thick binder on the table in front of me. What's this? I asked. Your work, she said. Therapy reports, testimonies, impact assessments, everything you wrote, compiled and fought for. You've spent your whole life healing others, Callista. Maybe now it's time to use what you know, to fight for yourself. I opened the binder. Page after page bore my handwriting, my evaluations, my victories. I wasn't just a mother, I was a record. When the day of the hearing arrived, I didn't hire a lawyer. I stood alone. The judge raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The courtroom buzzed with press whispers. Gregory sat across from me, surrounded by his attorneys, legs crossed like he was already confident of the outcome. I will represent myself, I said clearly. The judge nodded. Proceed. I began with the binder. Exhibit A, I said. A documented timeline of my employment history, including my work as a trauma therapist. Exhibit B, certifications and degrees earned while raising my daughter. Exhibit C, letters from clients, schools, colleagues, including May's teachers. I called my first witness, May. She stood with poise, the same poise she had the night of her art exhibit. She wore a simple white blouse, her curls pulled back, her hands steady. I'm not afraid of my mother, she said. She's never raised a hand to me, never made me feel small, never left me wondering if I mattered. I don't need to be protected from her. I need to be protected with her. The courtroom was still. Even Gregory didn't speak. The judge reviewed everything, read every line, and then looked up. This court finds no evidence of parental unfitness. On the contrary, Ms. Moore has demonstrated exceptional capacity as a guardian, therapist, and advocate. The petition is denied. Further, this court issues a formal warning to Mr. Moore for attempting to use the court as a tool for retaliation and manipulation. Gregory stood before the judgment was even finished. He walked out without a word. For the first time, he didn't have Elaine or Michael behind him. He walked out alone. This time, I didn't shake. I walked into the final hearing in a deep violet suit, the color of dignity, of healing, of bruises that had faded but were never forgotten. May walked beside me, her hand in mine. Behind us sat Rena, Veronica, and in the second row, a handful of familiar faces, former patients, friends, even a retired soldier who once told me I'd saved his life just by listening. I stepped forward, placed my binder on the table, and met the judge's eyes. Your Honor, I began, we are not here because I failed. We are here because I succeeded in silence, and someone saw that as a threat. I submitted detailed records, every diagnosis misused against me, every manipulated media snippet, every invoice for the nonprofit hours I'd logged unpaid. Witnesses came forward one by one, a nurse, a teacher, a social worker. And then, the veteran I'd helped 12 years ago. "She didn't just help me walk through trauma," he said. "She helped me find a reason to." I looked across the aisle. Gregory didn't even lift his head. I ended my case with a sentence that had lived in my throat for years. "I don't need permission to be a mother. I have been one. I don't need approval to lead, I already do. What I need is the legal space to continue doing both, without fear that truth is grounds for punishment." The courtroom was still again, until May stood. She opened a folded paper from her pocket. Her voice didn't tremble. "I used to ask my mom why she didn't tell people what happened. She'd smile and say it wasn't the right time. Today, I understand. She didn't wait because she was scared. She waited because she knew we all had to be ready to listen." The judge gave a slow nod. "This court upholds the previous ruling. Ms. Moore retains full custody. Furthermore, we issue a formal censure to Mr. Gregory Moore for abuse of legal process and emotional harassment." There was no outburst, no defiance. Gregory simply rose and left the room. He didn't turn around, he didn't look back. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, but they felt distant. I knelt beside May on the steps, wrapped my arms around her, pressed my forehead to hers, and whispered, "We did it." But inside, I knew. This wasn't about winning. This was about ending a legacy of silence and building one that spoke. It was a week after the court ruling when Michael showed up on my porch. No cameras, no lawyer speak, no Gregory in his shadow. Just Michael, holding an envelope in both hands like it weighed more than a verdict. We hadn't spoken since he whispered, "They won't stop," behind the gallery. Now, he looked like he hadn't slept. "This is from Mom," he said quietly. "She asked me to give it to you. Said she didn't have the right to say it out loud, not after all this time." I took it. The envelope was soft with age, the handwriting shaky. Elaine's. Inside was a folded letter, lined with the kind of words people only write when they think it might be their last chance. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Callista. I wouldn't if I were you. But I kept every article, every news clip. I read them in secret, in the dark, when your father was asleep. I watched you grow from a distance because I couldn't stand beside you. I was too weak to stand against him. I still am, in many ways. But this is me trying. If all I can offer is the truth, I hope that's enough." It took me hours to get through it. Not because the letter was long, but because every line cracked open something I thought had already healed. Michael sat on the steps beside me, elbows on his knees. "I'm not here to ask you to let anyone back in," he said. "I'm not picking sides anymore. I just wanted you to know the truth's been following you quietly. You weren't forgotten." I didn't respond. Not that day. Instead, I wrote a letter of my own. Not to send. Not for closure. Just to let my hands remember what it felt like to write something without fear. Dear Mom, forgiveness isn't something owed. It's not something people earn through time or silence. It's a boundary I draw, not to let people in, but to let go of what I refuse to carry anymore. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because my daughter deserves a mother who's not shackled to anger. I forgive you because I'm tired of bleeding from wounds that no longer exist. I folded the letter, read it aloud to May as she curled next to me on the couch. "Will you send it?" she asked. "No," I said, and slipped it into the drawer of my nightstand. Some things are meant to exist quietly, like a door that doesn't open, but still lets the light in. It stayed there, unread by its intended recipient. A symbol that not everything broken needed fixing. Some things just needed a place to rest. The sign outside read, "The Shelter Within, Seattle Branch," and beneath it, "Healing starts here." It was strange seeing those words on glass instead of flyers. Strange and perfect. I stood on the sidewalk watching the first group of visitors step inside. A teenage girl with fading bruises beneath her sleeves. A man in uniform, his hands twitching with a story he hadn't told yet. A mother holding her child like a lifeline. They were strangers, but I knew their pain like an old song. I was no longer just the founder of a center. I was now a state-appointed trauma recovery advisor. My voice, once silenced in courtrooms, now echoed in rooms where decisions about survivors were made. And for the first time, I didn't feel like an imposter. May's name had started appearing in places I never imagined. Emerging artist to watch. Healer through color. The Rhode Island School of Design had awarded her a full-ride scholarship. I found the acceptance letter taped to our fridge. At the bottom, a handwritten note from the admissions director read, "She paints like someone who's seen the end of hope and chose light anyway." Her senior thesis exhibit was called Unbroken Lines. Not lines that were perfect, but lines that honored their breaks, fractures that hadn't been erased, only softened. One painting hung in the center of the gallery. Two hands, one larger, one smaller, gripping each other beneath a field of stars. There were visible scars on both. They weren't hidden. They were part of the beauty. During an interview, someone asked May, "Do you think you'll ever make peace with the people who hurt your mother?" She glanced at me before answering, "I don't think peace is something you make with the past. I think it's something you make in spite of it." Later that week, I was asked the same question in a radio interview. "Do you want to reconcile with your parents?" the host asked gently. I smiled. "I'm not interested in rebuilding the house that broke me," I said. "I'm building something new, with the same hands that once trembled, now steady." We didn't throw parties. There were no grand speeches. Just quiet evenings on the front porch of our Seattle apartment, watching the wind ripple through the new center's banner. May leaned her head on my shoulder one night and whispered, "Mom, we really made it, didn't we?" I looked at the flickering lights inside the center. I looked at her. "We did," I said. "And I'm not looking back anymore. Not because the past doesn't matter, but because the road ahead deserves more of me than the pain behind ever did." Sometimes healing doesn't come from getting the apology we deserved. It comes from choosing peace over pride, clarity over chaos, and walking forward without waiting for someone to walk beside us. We don't owe our past a seat at our future. We owe ourselves the right to live freely. If this story moved you in any way, feel free to share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that speak the quiet truths we all carry.